People who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? Not security cameras per se, but I had a SOC-type job monitoring corporate internet usage. We had an image inspector watching people's web traffic, and it would throw up questionable images that someone on the network downloaded onto the big SOC screen. Being a medical-related company, there were a lot of breast cancer-type traffic that would throw off the porn detectors, which is why we watched in real-ish time. One time I was sitting at the desk overnight. Nobody should have been working, and suddenly the SOC screen turned into a wall of graphic child porn. Some genius took his laptop home, VPN'd into work, and started browsing so as to avoid being caught by his ISP. He's in prison now. This incident is a large part of why I no longer do that kind of work. Or corporate forensics. They make it sound like it's all catching hackers and espionage, but in reality, it's mostly looking at other people's porn. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. Mostly lots of sex. I've had to turn on the microphone and tell them to stop it or they'll be thrown out of the college gym this year. I used to work IT at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 p.m., leaving at around 3, and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 p.m. and the guy comes back in and is walking around the auditorium till 6 a.m. the next morning. In that time he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a shit ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as the jack-off bandit. Not for a living, but I have had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. The guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal in. Actually stealing shit several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird shit. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of this shit. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras: make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance. Otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall, hit it head-on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. One time there was a spider on the lens. It was big. It stayed there for like 3 days. Worked as a harbor master a while ago. Had to check the marina's cameras after a boat was abandoned at our docks. I was looking for the owner. I looked on the tape from the boat's first night in the marina. The man who had sailed the boat in was standing on the end of his boat for 2 hours, barely moving. Then at 1:30 a.m. he just walked off the back and dropped into the water. He never came back up. Never found his body. Freaky. I'm not in security, but I work for a bank and part of my job is checking the cameras in the morning for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels or leaves, etc. Last week I saw a ping on our back entrance camera, and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy the first didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 a.m. for a solid 20 minutes. Like just pacing the whole time. And every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by, and that must have set something in him off, because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it, but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse-type area. This giant front-end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall. And this one guy's life was ended when the front-end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of two guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them, to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I, too, was offered counseling for just watching the video. When I worked as a security officer, it was my first week on the job. I watched my boss and another officer try to talk a guy off of the top of our parking structure. Didn't work. Watched him jump off and land next to an employee who was coming in for her shift. Guy hit the ground so hard it exploded the belt right off of his pants. I will never forget watching that. Not necessarily creepy, but I work on security for a popular UK supermarket and came into work one day to find a note asking me to burn an incident off the cameras onto disk. It was something from the car park the previous night, so I figured we'd had a shoplifter in or an accident in the car park. But no, it wasn't anything as pleasant as that. We'd had a situation where a couple, older white gentleman and youngish Asian female, had been in store, and the night security guy just thought they were acting a bit funny. So he follows them round store on CCTV in store to see if anything went on. Nothing really happens during this time, though the guy seems to become more and more aggravated. They go outside having purchased their shopping to pack it into the car boot. When a clear argument occurs between the monsieur, he suddenly turns round, kicks the empty trolley across the car park, and then smacks her full force in the face out of seemingly nowhere. She recoils in pain. A bit more shouting takes place, but she seems to dutifully take her seat in the passenger seat, despite what just took place. During the process of burning this to disk for the police, since our security guy had called it in as an assault, I had to re-watch the moment where he hits her over and over again, but watch helplessly as she seems to calmly get into the car of the man who just assaulted her. Long story short, she was a mail-order bride who was trafficked here, and as well as assault, he got done for people trafficking. So a pretty wholesome ending to an otherwise awful story. I used to do asset protection for a Walmart in the very heroin-addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me, and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you. Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember well. Always stay with me. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands, we had camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall, with the entrances to all the rooms. One day I'm sitting there minding my own business and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing, and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back to the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room, so I went back out to find her not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked, and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back and there she was, still on the camera. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor.